Hello, YouTubers. Welcome back to Keeping It Real. Pastor Robert Falcar here, and you know this.
Pastor Joel Perez.
There you go. So today we want to come back at you with a new topic, church divisions. What do we mean? Well, we're going to talk about what we mean exactly by church divisions. I want to talk about why churches divide. Sin amongst leadership, it's a big topic. Scandals like gossip, violations, both spiritual and physical and mental. And there's also the famous doctrinal differences. We also want to get into the results of church division and most importantly, how we avoid this. Let's talk about what is specifically do we mean by church division, Pastor Joel?
Well, I think today's topic is pretty interesting. What we want to focus on today is going to be sin amongst leadership. But when it comes to church divisions, I think it's important to realize that it's not always about a church actually dividing. And I know that sounds a little weird and a little funny, but the truth is that the whole purpose of the church was to provide an environment of safety for all the congregants, for all the saints, as the Bible calls it. And the church division begins when any of those congregants does not feel safe anymore, does not feel comfortable. Now, is that discomfort or lack of safety sometimes something that's brought upon by the congregant themselves? Yes, and that's something that we'll be talking about as well.
Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about church division outside of church. We're actually talking about church division inside the four walls, meaning within one ministry. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. We're not talking necessarily the difference between a Pentecostal and a Baptist or an evangelist and a Catholic or what have you. We're talking about within the same ministry, within the same domain, if we can use that term, there being a division there. That's where the key is for us.
Now, why do you think and how, more importantly, does sin come into church? Particularly talking about leadership. Now, when we say leadership, we are referring to laborers, deacons, and all the way up to pastors and senior pastors. But what is it? How is it that it comes into the church? What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think that it's been in the church since the inception of church. The truth is that it sits and it dwells amongst us. We all know that from the beginning, you know, when the whole Adam and Eve thing happened, all of a sudden our nature went from being a holy and sanctified nature to now a nature that was it's a sin nature. You know, the human nature kicked in, and when human nature kicked in, we got some benefits and we got some detriments. One benefit, free will. Now, free will could be a great thing or it could be the worst thing. So the free will is really the key, and that's where I think sin amongst leadership comes to play, free will.
Now, when we say sin amongst leadership, what are we referring to? What is it that we're talking about in particular?
Well, obviously, we're not talking about sin, and it's not downplaying any sin, because sin is sin, we all know that. But we're not talking about sin like, hey, the pastor got up one morning and he decided to lie so he can, get over on somebody or something like that, or he decided to go to the store and eat a grape during a time where he didn't pay for it. I'm not talking about that kind of sin. I guess I'm really referring to the sin that stands out. Mainly, I guess it would be the sin against one's own word, one's own call. Standing up there, let's say, and preaching a sermon or teaching on forgiveness, and turning around and having unforgiveness towards someone, and then making it something public where everyone can see it. Because the truth is, look, you are going to get up there sometimes and you are going to preach about a topic, and you may think that you've gotten to that threshold where you need to be able to be comfortable with that topic, but maybe something relives, something comes back. So you fall, okay? You fall. The key, at least in my life, is, if you fall, get up, acknowledge you fell. Be a man, be a woman enough to say, I made a mistake, I messed up. But that's when grace kicks in, when you're able to recognize and repent.
So now we're saying that the laundry should be aired publicly. Is that what you're saying?
Well, my take on that. I'm all about being transparent. I'm all about being open, and I'm all about trying to be honest. And notice I say trying. My motto again is I try. Do I fail? All the time. Do I make mistakes? All the time. Do I sin? All the time. Now, I'm not saying it in pride. I'd rather point the finger at myself than allow anyone else to think that they can point the finger at me and have something over on me. Make sense?
Makes sense. Now, who do we see that gets most affected in these situations? Because it is an organization that has many layers, but there's also many different walks of life that are involved. Who in particular do we see that gets most affected in these situations, especially when it comes from the top? Especially maybe it's a pastor where that falls into sin. And like you said earlier, we're not talking about that they lied today. We're talking about sin. We're talking about the deeper situations.
I mean, I think everybody gets affected. I think the effect that's going to have the most impact is not necessarily on the immediate pastors and leaders and church members. It's the kids. I think the kids are the ones that get the most impacted because you plant the seed in their life of negativity when it comes to church. And all of a sudden now we enter into where we're entering right now currently in the church, where statistics show that, if I'm not mistaken, correct me, that in 20 years, 60% of the church that we know today won't be there. The church is going to diminish. And if you think about that, how does that happen? It happens because over this entire generation that's just passed and the generation prior to that, little by little, we've been deteriorating the value, deteriorating the love, deteriorating the amount of effort that people put into the church, because church has not become a primary anymore. Now it's become a secondary, and sometimes in cases it's become a third option for people in their lives. Korea quickly ramped up and took over that primary location of God in our lives.
What about people that think that there's this double standard in church, or that think that people are hypocritical, that they're one way at the pulpit, that they're one way in church and then different way outside of church? What are your thoughts on that?
They're absolutely right. We are one way in the pulpit, we are one way in the church, and we're one way outside. And we're one way with our spouse, and we're one way with our kids, and we're one way at our jobs, and we're one way in the gym, and we're one way in the BJ's when we go to shop, and we're one way everywhere we go. We all have different masks.
But what do you tell those people who say they steer away from church because they feel church is hypocritical, because they feel that it's something that's it's a performance when it's up at the altar, when it's up at the stage, as many call it a stage?
Well, I always go back to the same thing. What do I tell them? The truth. That is the truth. That people are different. But when you go to church and you recognize and acknowledge that you're not going for the guy that's standing up there or the woman that's standing up there, but you're going for the being that's above everybody, that's changing everybody, that's putting everybody through a process to make them better, then people become independent of the people and they become dependent upon God. And that's the sign of a true church. When a pastor or a leader can lead people to God rather than themselves.
I think that you hit the nail on the head. When we can lead them to Christ, when it is about Christ, when it is about Christ being the center and not men, because men, we're always going to fail as men and women of God. Now, how do we avoid this?
How can we avoid men looking at men as that God figure? It's going to take a lot. It's genuinely going to take a lot, because I believe that the reason we are where we are today in the church is because over the years we were actually conditioned to see our leaders as that representation of God, which is not necessarily bad. The problem is that we put them in the category of God. And when we put them in the category of God, now all of a sudden, in the instance of sin, the church divides. Now it doesn't become a safe place for you. Why not? What difference does it make if your pastor sinned, stepped down, and became a congregant? What difference does it make to you? What difference does it make to me? It shouldn't, because the truth is, and looking at it from the perspective of a pastor, I always say, if I can tolerate you, if I can love you in your sin, when you walk through those doors for the first time, and you were a violator, a liar, a thief, and all these things, then why can't you accept me for being a human being? Why do you think that I'm going to be perfect all the time? I'm not. And maybe that's the difference between this ministry and most ministries. I tell people straight from the gusto, I am not perfect. I'm far from it. I'm not even, and I don't want to say I'm not trying to be perfect, but I'm not trying to ever portray that I am perfect, because I know that I fail. I know I make mistakes. I have a bad reputation in certain areas of my life. Again, going back to the mask. In certain places, I am one way. In certain places, I am another. It's not about being a hypocrite. It's about being able to mold to where you are. Now, what does that mean, mold? It doesn't mean that I have to compromise my faith. No, don't misunderstand me. It just means that I can't walk into an environment of work and try to beat everybody over the head with the Bible. I can't walk in and start preaching at a client's company because, you know what, maybe they will take offense to. There is a place for everything. But I can walk into church and preach the word of God. I can walk into church and use the word to bring conviction to my life or maybe the life of others. So you have to learn how to separate that line. You have to straddle a line of faith, absolutely. But you can't try to push your faith on anyone else. Now, at the same time, you can't decline to express your faith if it's asked either. So, sin amongst leadership, what happens? Sin walks in. People assume these leaders are like God. They are God-like. And that's great, except they forget sometimes and they actually put them in the category of God. So the sin walks in, the sin starts deteriorating, the leaders think they have to uphold a certain standard, which is the biggest weight in ministry altogether, and then the sin just creeps in quietly and starts eroding more and more at the leader, and then eventually at the church. And that's the plan of the devil.
Well, I think it's very important that we lead by example. Not from here out, but literally by example, by our actions, by what we show and what we portray. And I think it's very important, as we've discussed, that we have to be transparent. We're human beings. We have to be transparent. We got to show them that we are human, that we are going to make mistakes, but that we're on a road of change and progress, and it's only through Him. And on that note, we just wanted to present this topic to you, but we want to hear from you guys. We want to hear what your thoughts are. We want to hear do you agree, do you disagree? Hit the like button if you want to hear more, if you want to see more, because we're going to continue this discussion, but we definitely want to hear back from you guys. Please hit subscribe. Coming to you from somewhere untraditional. Yes, we're on a plane heading to a service, but please stay tuned, get involved, become part of the conversation. Be proactive, not reactive. Until next time,
Pastor Joel.
Pastor Robert. See you on the next one.
No, no, no.